Thank you, Margaret, and welcome all to my 1966 Palm Springs living room. I keep feeling like Don and Megan Draper should be on the other couch. We have here today two very different institutions, as Margaret alluded to. Paul Quinn College is a private liberal arts, historically black college located just south of downtown Dallas that has 420 undergraduate students, about 80% of them.
We're over 500.
Over 500, 80% of them African American. UNC at Chapel Hill has about 18,000 undergraduate students, about 56% of them white this year, down from 87% as recently as 30 years ago. 30 years ago. These are institutions that are different in almost every possible way, except you may be joined by a love of basketball, as we were discussing. Yet each of you are working very hard on models to create access for a broader range of students. So let's talk about them each specifically before we talk about some of the broader policy issues that surround this question. President Sorrell, you are a federally recognized work college where every student works on or off campus. There are a lot of college students who work, but at your institution, every student works. Why have you chosen that model?
Well, there are a couple reasons for that. First of all, in the reality of education today is that students are working. If you are a dependent student, over 70% of those students are working more than 20 hours per week. Independent students, more than 80% of them are working more than 30 hours per week. So students are already working.
Right.
What we did was we identified that that's a difficult life for students to lead. So we thought if we could find a way to make our students' lives easier by combining work with the academic enterprise, let's look at that. So, we created a version of higher education. There were no other urban work colleges before we created the model. Our students work between 10 and 15 hours per week. They work on and off campus. And it has allowed us to help them graduate with two forms of education. The ability to work and show you have a work transcript, which explains what you know how to do, and then your traditional academic transcript.
Is the work connected to their academic pursuits?
As much as possible. So we try to attract business opportunities for the students in the areas that they're interested in, or at a minimum, they could be in, for example, some of our students are working in schools, but they're not interested in being teachers, but they're interested in being, business people, and they work in the business functions of the school.
You mentioned that many students work at other institutions, but I suppose one thing that's different here is that at other institutions, they're in charge of kind of making it all fit together, their hours, and the hours they have at the sandwich shop or wherever they're working. In the case of your students, are you able to in a more kind of predictable manner organize and structure the schedules?
We go out and find the jobs for the students. We have tailored the academic schedule to allow for students to be able to work. So we have classes on Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, which allows Tuesdays and Thursdays the students to work, which reduces their stress level. I think one of the things that colleges have been too slow to recognize is it's not a badge of honor to stress out your students. Right? No, really and truthfully, we work to reduce stress in every other aspect of our lives. But in higher education, we think, let's stress you out more. So, I think the ability to help our students find a way to, and look, 85 to 90% of our students annually are on Pell Grants. So our students come to us needing a different level of care, not to be pandered to, not to be coddled, but to acknowledge the realities of their lives and then to adjust and develop an academic experience which allows them to manage their lives while embracing the academic rigor.
So, Mr. Farmer, you have another model. For over a decade, UNC has operated the Carolina Covenant, which guarantees that students from low-income families will have no debt when they graduate. How does that work?
Well, students earn admission to the university. We actually have active outreach all across the state of North Carolina. We bring people to us who we know have the capacity to get the job done, and then we offer them the opportunity to either receive full grants or grants plus a share of work study, and really sort of walk with them along the way to graduation. And the program has actually been a huge success for us. We had about 750 Covenant scholars on our campus last year, about 15% of all new students. They're Average family incomes are around $24,000. So I love the emphasis on work that you're talking about, and I am in awe of the work that you've done with Pell-eligible students generally across the institution. We've almost eliminated the graduation rate gap between Pell-eligible and other students, thanks to the covenants and other things that we're doing. We have a little ways to go, but it's great work that you're doing.
Let's talk about that specifically, because one thing we know is that the gap is narrowing between the share of white kids and kids of color who go directly on from high school to college. More kids are starting, and that gap is getting a lot smaller. But the gap nationally in college completion remains pretty daunting. I want to ask each of you what you have learned about improving completion rates for low-income kids and kids of color and first-generation students.
Well, you know, I think that you can't reduce it to just one category of students, right? So for example, we were actually having this conversation in my institution yesterday. So we take some students that are academically fragile. And when you are economically fragile and you are academically fragile, that increases the level of difficulty of completion. Because those students have lived their entire lives believing it's not supposed to work out for them. So what would be a bump in the road for many people becomes this seismic occurrence for them. So what we've discovered is that we have to put our arms around them completely. One of the things that we're introducing beginning in the fall is we're going to keep our students in school for the first 2 years consecutively, which we believe keeps them with us, reduces the opportunity for life's outside distractions to disrupt them, shortens the amount of time until they get to graduation. We think we can make it a common experience at Paul Quinn College for students to graduate in 3.5 years. Highly motivated students can graduate in 3, and that'll allow us to even improve the ability for
And you say keep them with, so it's year-round, summer?
So they come to us, we have a summer bridge program where they pick up 9 hours in their first summer coming in. Then they go to school. First semester, that's 15 hours. Then we have a 2-month break between, we're done at Thanksgiving for first semester. Then, because we let the students go home and work. Then they come back, second semester, 15 hours. They come back, they stay that next summer. They pick up 12 to 15 hours more. Then they come back for the fall, come back for the spring. And then if they choose to have a break, they can take the break. But literally, the prescribed experience will be the first 2 years you're going to school year-round.
Ms. Farmer, a pretty striking statistic. Your 4-year graduation rate for students in the Carolina Covenant has gone from 57% in 03 to 80%. Now, you've significantly improved it. What have you learned along the way?
That deserves a hand, first of all. That is fantastic.
What have you learned along the way that's allowed those numbers to go up?
Well, let me say, first of all, thank you for applauding for our students. Because no matter what a university does to support students, it's students in the end who have to get the job done, and they're the ones who've bowed their necks and they've gotten the work done. So thank you for that. You know, I appreciated the emphasis on the common experience. I think one of the things that we've learned from working with students is that there are, you said, bumps that are seismic occurrences, cracks that are actually the Grand Canyon, and trying to close some of those up and to try to normalize the things that students do, no matter where they come from and no matter what kind of household they're from. You know, we want students at Chapel Hill to have something of a common experience. We want the opportunities that we offer to some to be the opportunities that are available to all. So things like, surprisingly, funding study abroad, funding summer study for internships, doing things that low-income students can't afford to do, but their more affluent classmates can do, has had the effect not only of, you know, raising the fortunes of students and improving their long-term outlooks, but just also helping them feel more at home with others on their campus and to feel less of a divide between themselves and the students they're living with or the students they're learning alongside. And I think sometimes we tend to underestimate the impact of social supports like those, sense of belonging supports that really encourage students, as you were saying, to really believe that they belong there, that they own the place in the way that any other student owns it. That makes a huge difference in a student's willingness to persist and graduate.
I was going to ask you about that. When you talk about improving completion, is it mostly providing students help on the academic side, or is it largely what we call the soft skills and the sense of belonging, the ability to manage time, and et cetera?
I think it's the former largely, although I will say that, well, first of all, we're in we're in a really lucky situation. I mean, we have incredible students. They're very well prepared academically. They don't all come from the same place. Some of them come from high schools that have everything and some from high schools that have nothing, but what the students have in common is we're convinced they have the capacity to work at the highest possible level. They don't all come with the same preparation, but they come with comparable gifts that we believe strongly will help them do what they need to do to make the full use of their time with us. You know, the interesting thing that we've learned, when our students haven't performed well, sometimes it's been because the institution hasn't been as welcoming. Sometimes it's because our faculty haven't known how to teach to a diverse classroom of learners. And one of the best things that's happened on our campus, and it really was a function of our having increasing numbers of low-income students, but also our having faculty members who recognized that we had increasing numbers of low-income students. We've re-engineered gateway classes, especially in the sciences, and have pretty much been able to eliminate the inequities in achievement between low-income students and others, because faculty members looked at their results and said, hey, what if it's not my students? What if it's me? And then they did something about it. And I think that's important as well.
From the research of Carolyn Hoxby and others, we know that a lot of highly qualified lower income students simply don't apply to any selective public college. Can you just talk a little bit about how you recruit and kind of encourage people to make the first step, take the first step?
Well, you know, I think for us, one of the things that we have to do is speak in a language that students understand, but I think you all know that anyway. We have to show students people who look like them. We have to tell the stories of students whose stories are like the stories of the students we're trying to recruit. And we have to offer students something of value. You know, the students who are choosing among us and other schools, they're smart. They have many choices. They don't have to pick Carolina. And so we've learned really over the years not to go to students from on high saying, here, let us reach down and grab people and bring them to Chapel Hill. Instead, what we've learned is that we have to go humbly to people and say, look, please give us a chance. Give us a chance to earn your loyalty. Let us walk with you for a while. Let us be your friend, and let us introduce you to other people who've walked the same path that you would walk if you came to us. I think it works. Plus, we have 55 alumni working at high schools across North Carolina, primarily in low-income high schools through the Carolina College Advising Corps. And although they're not recruiting specifically for Chapel Hill, the presence in low-income students of Chapel Hill alumni
They kind of are.
themselves are students of color, who are first generation, who came as Covenant scholars, that makes a difference to kids.
President Sorrell, how do you reach out?
Well, the first thing I want to say is I am a vocal critic of the idea of undermatching. I think it's insulting. I think it's demeaning to the institutions that people point to and say, don't go to these schools, because for a long time, those types of schools happen to be my school. And the idea that students aren't smart enough to figure out where they feel at home seems a little bit ridiculous. Like, why is it just one version of higher education that works? You know, the
argument would be that they're able to, you know, because they spend more per students, and they traditionally have produced
here's
higher graduation rates and higher lifetime earnings because they have more to invest.
Well,
that's the argument.
So investment isn't always a financial investment. You can't beat our personalized attention. You can't beat the fact that I'm a president that knows where my students come from. I've gone to their high schools. I've walked their hallways. I've walked their streets. I've hung out with their families, right? I've been to their niece's Sweet 16 parties, right? So that type of personal engagement, and I'm not the only one. That's our experience. So with, you know, all due respect to this notion that we can reduce everything to a quantifiable financial definition, I would refute that by saying that's other people's measures. But if you understood our communities, you would understand that it isn't always about the financial assessment.
It's about a sense of welcoming and belonging as well.
It's about understanding who you are and whose you are.
Yeah. Let's talk, interesting. Let's talk a little bit about, kind of broaden the lens a little bit. Feel free to applaud. Broaden the lens a little bit and talk about some of the public policy issues, because academics are one thing, cost is another. And Stephen, one of the big things we are seeing, one of the big trends in higher education over the last 20 years, public higher education, is a shift of responsibility from the public, the community, through the taxpayers, toward families and students themselves. The latest state higher education executive officers report it's a terrific report, by the way, for anyone who has seen it, calculated that from 2008 through 2017, in other words, through the school year that ended last June, in inflation-adjusted dollars, the average state spending per student dropped by 11.5%. That's a decline of almost $800 per student. North Carolina was at 16.8% reduction by that measure. Texas at almost 15%. We know that the share of jobs in the society that require some kind of higher ed is rising. So why is public support for higher education falling?
How long do we have?
9 minutes and 37 seconds. We don't have all of them.
I think there are a lot of reasons, and other people are better positioned than I to explain them. I think part of it has to do with our forgetting for a little while that we need to make the case that what we do matters, and really be able to prove that what we do matters. And it matters in a broad sense, not a narrow sense. I think there's a tendency now, at least in the world that I'm living in, to think about higher ed as a mechanism towards jobs, which is one really important thing to think about when we think about higher ed. But that's never the only reason for higher ed. You know, people still go to college to have their lives transformed. And I think we've lost the ability to communicate to people why it should be important that a person go to school to have his or her life transformed. And I think as long as we play only on the ground of jobs, we're only making a partial case for why the work that we do matters and why people should be loyal to us and why they should invest in us.
You know, President Sorrell, again, this is talking about public institutions, but I'd like to get your thoughts on it. The nation, almost without any attention, the nation crossed a somewhat ominous milestone in 2017, where for the first time in a majority of the states, a majority of the revenue for public higher education came from tuition rather than state dollars. 2017 was the first time that had ever happened. And we have seen average tuition up, I believe, $1,700 per student over the same period that the public support has declined. What are the implications of that kind of shift of responsibility away from the community toward the individual students and their families?
So I think it's interesting when you mention the word community, there's an argument to be made that part of the reason we see a reduction in support is because the legislators are looking at the students and not seeing themselves.
Yes.
Right? So for the first time in our nation's history, the majority of students in public K through 12 are on free and reduced lunches.
Right.
So these are different students who are coming. And, you know, listen, it could be, you know, just unlikely happenstance that people are reducing the support of public education at a time where the students are increasingly diverse and increasingly low income, maybe, right? But I mean, I think that, you know, part of what we're seeing here is this idea, let me say it differently. I think you have to always make the case. You have to continuously make the case. And I think higher education struggles with making the case. If you threaten to reduce the support for football teams, I don't think you'd have this problem, because I'll tell you what, the Crimson Tide is never going to lack for public support, right? But we don't have that conversation.
Well, you touched on what was literally my next question. Stephen, let me ask you. As President Sorrell said, we are now at a point where a majority of our K-12 students nationwide are kids of color. By 2020, the census projects a majority of everybody under 18 in the country will be kids of color. By the mid-2020s, a majority of all the high school graduates will be kids of color. And it is against this backdrop that we are seeing this historic shift from public resources toward the individual families. Are those two facts related, you think?
You probably can't say that.
Don't tamper with the witness.
I'm just, you know, like, I like him. I want him to keep his job.
Let me dodge the question. You know, what I will say about this, I think, so think about policymakers and think about people of a certain age. Think about people in my vintage.
Yeah.
We might think about it one way.
By the way, 3/4 of the baby boom is white, and a majority of millennials by 2025 will be non-white.
So you know, so forget about how we think about it. When we talk with our students about how they think about it, they have a completely different approach. You know, we surveyed all the students we enrolled last year, and we asked them questions about the extent to which they expected of us an experience that would allow them to get better at understanding, working with, finding common cause with people who differed from them. Yeah. And overwhelming majorities, when I say overwhelming, 92, 95% of all the students we enrolled said, yes, we want these, most of them strongly in support of those kinds of experiences. So you know, you can get 9 out of 10 people to agree about anything. You couldn't get 1 out of the 3 of us even to agree. So, you know, our kids see this in a different way. They understand which way the world is going. They want to be prepared to live in that world. They want to be prepared to thrive in that world. And they're not going to be able to do it if they're going to schools like the schools that I went to back in the day.
Well, okay, let me, because I want to turn it around and frame it from the other way, ask the question from a different direction, which is that these kinds of issues of access have often been framed in terms of equity to these communities. But in fact, if a majority of the high school graduates and a majority of the under 18 population are going to be kids of color, it's not only the issue of what happens to those kids doesn't only affect them and their families, it affects the overall society, because that's the majority of the future workers, you know, consumers, taxpayers, voters, everything. And I'm wondering, when you talk to policymakers, do they have a sense of the magnitude of that change and what would be required to help more of those kids get through higher education and in a position to achieve the middle-class life?
I don't even know if we have to answer that question if you just look at the policies that these folks are offering, right? Look at the restrictions on voting. We know who the people who are being impacted, negatively impacted by these. There is this enormous disconnect between who is making the laws and who is being impacted by them at the higher education standpoint, and everywhere else in between. If you look at the composition of the legislatures, it does not match the composition of the states.
Do policymakers in North Carolina see a stake for the future of the state's economy in improving outcome for minority and low-income kids at higher education?
Whether they do or not, they should. And they should because, I mean, there's evidence all around us. I mean, there's nothing more predictable than demographics. And we're already past the point where our state's been transformed utterly, and there's no turning back. There's no going back to the North Carolina 50 years ago or 75 years ago. And honestly, it's a good thing. You know, the state we have now is a dynamic state. We have talent we never had before. We have people who are hungry to learn, people who are hungry to contribute. And what we really ought to be focusing on is figuring out a way to help all of these students make the most of their gifts. And what we also need to do is really remember that each student's making the most of her gifts helps every other student make the most of their gifts. We really are in this together. You know, my children who went to a university town high school, who had the best of everything, they have benefited from walking alongside other people who come from backgrounds completely different from theirs. They know more about the world than they did before.
Let's bring in the audience. Or not. Oh yeah, here we go.
Oh, hi, my name is Mia Loudon. I went to UNC Chapel Hill, and I was recently telling my sister that her son should consider, as he's considering going to medical school, the idea that sometimes introductory science courses are designed to be weed-out classes. So I'm really happy to hear that at UNC that they are rethinking how they're doing the science classes. So I was wondering, do you think that is happening more widely as well?
I think so, because our faculty members, and our faculty members borrowed ideas from other faculty members. So it all swirls around out there in the world, and no one should be missing a trick. No one should be too proud then to claim somebody else's discovery as their own when it comes time to putting good work to practice. I think it is becoming a thing across the country. And again, when you look at the students we have, there's no reason why students should be failing biology. They're not failing biology because they can't get biology.
That's right.
If they're failing biology, it's because we haven't figured out how to teach them biology. And the light bulb has finally gone on for us, and I think for schools like us, that our students are capable of more than we know. And our job's to help them make the most of what they're capable of, help them achieve those things instead of trying to find ways to turn them away.
Let's squeeze in one more question if we can. Do we have? Yes, over here in the front.
Hi, I'm Lucy Barrier with the National School Boards Association, also went to UNC Chapel Hill. I don't know if you can speak to this. There's a lot of us. But as far as these strategies are working in Chapel Hill, how much are they being used throughout the state and the Carolina system? And are other schools using these strategies and seeing the same results?
I think schools have used some strategies, again, that we've borrowed. and sometimes people have been kind enough to copy us. I mean, the one thing I will say that I wish more schools did was invest in the schools in their communities and in their states. Yeah. You know, our involvement through the Carolina College Advising Corps has really been transformative, not just for communities, but also for the university. We know so much more about the communities where our kids come from than we did before because we have people there. And it's that kind of commitment that public universities especially really ought to be making.
President Sorrell, let me ask you the kind of equivalent question. Are you trying to expand your model beyond your campus?
We are. We are in the process of creating a national network of urban work colleges that will use, we have created an educational model called reality-based education, and there are 3 pillars: experiential learning through the work program, team-based group project learning, and then our spin on the liberal arts, which we call the Quinnite arts. And we think that, you know, by doing this, and that it'll help students really be able to access education in a way that makes sense to them and for them and lead them without debt. Because look, we only charge $15,000 a year for everything, right? So we've created a pathway for students who rely on Pell to graduate with less than $10,000 of debt if they so choose.
Wow. Well, you know, in this setup, I really feel like I should be offering you, the 2 of you, a martini now that we're finished. But since I can't do that, let me just offer you my thanks and ask the audience to join in thanking this terrific panel.